Oh, sorry. Didn't see you there. I've just spent the last 3 hours looking at this picture. Bushiroad have somehow managed to go and do it and rival the beauty and amazing waifu values of Lukier, Gabriel, Nightrose, and thus a new best girl unit joins the fray, Bavsargra. Hello everyone, I'm sure I'm not the only one that is suddenly very obsessed with Bavsargra after the Overdress Season 2 anime. Also, if you still have not seen the Overdress Season 2 anime, you should definitely watch it. Today, we're going to take a look at a Bavsargra deck profile using just the cards up to D-BT03. So this does not include any of the D-BT04 cards. And now normally you'd be looking at an English Bavsargra here, but unfortunately in Europe, the Bavsargra start deck has been delayed until somewhere like mid-January because of course the distributors have taken holidays, of course. They also closed during Christmas, and so it was pretty unfortunate release timing, and so we're going to be getting it much later. So as a result, today's deck profile, I'll be using Japanese cards for the Bavsargra ride line and any cards that come from the Bavsargra deck, but any other Dragon Empire cards from D-BT03 and earlier will be in English, so you don't have to worry about that. And for any Japanese effects, I'll pop up the little kind of like box explanation on the screen at the same time. So this deck is actually surprisingly very powerful. If you want to watch it be played, I did actually playtest with it on my Twitch stream. I'll leave a link in the description with a timestamp to where the games begin. I think I played about 3 games with it or so. And just Bavsargra on her own and the weapons are very powerful. I kind of want to say this is the strongest start deck of them all so far. And it's only going to get stronger in set 4 because of how much faster the deck becomes and how much bigger the rearguard columns will become as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. We're going to be using a, she's a Blaze Maiden, Dragon Blaze Maiden. So I'm using a Dragon Maiden playmat, clearly XD. So let's start off with the ride line, and this one is actually quite important to be the specific card. So first off, we have the Ahinsa as the grade 0, then we have the Namokaru as the grade 1, then we have the Haribadora as the grade 2, and finally Bavsargra as the grade 3. So let's explain one by one what these cards do. So first things first, we have Ahinsa. So Ahinsa is the regular starter. When you go second, you ride over it, you draw 1, but you have to run this card. Like, you cannot choose any other starter because it shuts down the whole deck, right? The reason why I say that is because the grade 1, the Namokaru, says when you ride this over the Ahinsa, then you may Soul Blast 1 and search your deck for either a Prithvi or a Swayambhu, reveal it and add it to your hand and shuffle your deck. So this card itself, when you ride it over that specific grade 0, will search for either the sword or the shield and add it to your hand, which is very important, right? That is literally how you set up the starting plays of this deck. And of course you can choose to first resolve the search and then resolve the draw. That is of course fine. Or you can choose to draw first and of course then resolve the other effect as well. But it's already a very good grade 1, for the ride deck. We'll go over the rearguard circle effect a bit later afterwards. And then usually for your grade 2 ride, you want to discard a weapon, one of the equipments for the ride up, because when you ride into the Haribadora, it says when you ride over Namokaru, you get to choose an equipment card from your drop zone and add it back into your hand. So you literally refund the cost for the ride deck. And that is why you usually have a pretty big hand with this deck in the early game, because you're searching cards, you're drawing, you're not actually losing any cards as a result of all these things, and it's just a very nice ride line. So the grade 2 is also very good, and finally Bavsargra, the grade 3, is also incredible. So she has 2 abilities. Her first one is Vanguard Circle once per turn. When she is equipped, you soul charge 1 and choose a grade 1 or lower from your drop zone and call it to rear. So this is already really amazing because just on turn 3 you already get extra soul and you get to revive grade 1s, which of course we run grade 1s that can play a pretty aggressive early game, that even if they get taken out we can revive them and continue to aggress. On top of that, she has a second skill. It says once per turn, if this unit has 2 or more equipments, you can Soul Blast 2, retire all of your opponent's front row rear guards, and for that turn she gets an extra critical. This ability is incredible. To think that this card on its own has so much power with the equipment, as well as the ability to burn the front row. It also bypasses resist, so basically if your opponent has 2 Fasados in the front row, goodbye, they're not being selected by an ability, they're, it's wiping out the entire front row, doesn't choose anything. So this ability is really nice, and the extra crit is also just beautiful. But you might be thinking, what is equipment? What are these equipments you're talking about, dude? I haven't, play this game in a few months, what's going on? Well, Bushiroad tasked me with the amazing task, as you saw from my Christmas gift, to explain this deck to you, and let me tell you how it works. So basically, there are order cards in this deck that function as equipment to your Vanguard. So for those that played Vanguard in the past, this might look a little bit similar to Legion, because yes, you actually equip them to your Vanguard circle. So these are order cards, which if you don't know, are basically spell cards in Vanguard. And so they say normal order equipment, and they equip on a specific part part of Bavsargra. It's either her right hand or her left hand. And so in the start deck, you get the shield and the sword. And so they both do very specific things that are amazing. So let's talk about the equipments now that we've talked about the right deck. We'll start off with the shield, which we play at a 1 copy, which says this equips to Bavsargra's left hand, although it is on her right side, it is her left hand. And in order to play it, you pay counterblast 1, right? So it's a grade 3, so you can only play it when you're on grade 3, and you counterblast 1 and you equip it basically to the right side of Bavsargra because that is her left hand. And when it is equipped on Vanguard Circle, because this does occupy the Vanguard Circle, it says once per turn, when the equipped unit is being attacked for that battle, you may give the equipped unit plus 10k power. This is an incredible ability because this means that every single turn you have a once per turn 10k shield. That is 1 card you're saving from hand, or 2 cards even if you don't have a 10k shield in hand, that you can choose to guard attacks with, and it is amazing. Like, it might not seem like much, but in the long term, you know, as the game drags on, you save so many cards by having this, and the shield is just honestly arguably one of the best weapons because of that. So it only costs counterblast 1 to play, and it stays on the Vanguard Circle for the entire time. Like, even when you go to your next turn or you persona ride over it, this will stay equipped unless you re-equip a different weapon that equips to Bavsargra's left hand. So that's the shield, right? But she also has another weapon, which is the sword. So the sword equips to her right hand on her left side, and this one costs Soul Blast 1 to play. And it says when the unit equipped with this card attacks for that battle, the equipped unit gains plus 10,000 power, and at the end of that battle, if your opponent has 4 or less cards in damage, you may choose to counterblast 2 and put this card into the drop in order to choose your opponent's Vanguard and deal it 1 damage. So of course, if you watch the anime, there's a very beautiful scene where she tosses the sword at Bruce and the sword breaks on Bruce, thus dealing the damage. So it's a very, very beautiful, you know, scene, but this is basically what the deck wants to do, right? It wants to equip these 2 orders for now. In set 4, there are 2 other order cards, which are a spear and a gun that you also play, but that's not for the time being. But this is basically what you want to be aiming for as of turn 4 in this variant of the deck. So that's the full power of Bavsargra. Once you've equipped both of them, you get to essentially have the full effect in order to not just burn damage and gain power, but also have a shield and also be able to get the crit and the field wipe. For the sword, we actually play 4 copies, and this is the card that you really want to be mulliganing for. So much like how in the Nirvana deck you want to mulligan for arcs all the time in order to get that early card draw, in this deck you really want to mulligan for the Pritibi, because this, without this, the deck doesn't turn on. Like, it just does not. You don't get the retire skill, you don't get the crit pressure, you don't get this like damage pressure that your opponent has to think about. And you know, I've been playing this deck against like meta decks in set 3, like Bastion and Bruce, and like you definitely do stand a chance against them even with this build, which is really impressive. And it's all thanks to the fact that, you know, with the 2 weapons equipped, Bavsargra is like a minimum 23k attacker, and you get a free 10k shield every turn, plus crit pressure, plus board wipe, plus potential damage ping. Just be careful that when you use this effect to deal a damage, you have either a replacement Pritivi in your hand, or you're willing to take the risk to not have that plus 10k power that the sword gives. There's also grade 3 in the start deck that we do play at a couple copies that can salvage weapons from the drop back into your hand, but it does cost a counterblast, and it is a grade 3 as well, so you lose out on shield value in the deck, and the orders don't have shield value in the first place, so that's something that you're kind of dealing with to begin with. So do keep that in mind and be a bit careful when you are playing with the swords. Alright, so that explains the ride line as well as the weapons. Now let's go over the rest of the deck. So up next, of course, this deck is Persona Ride Reliant. So we play 3 more copies of Bavsargra. So of course she is there just for Persona Ride because of course with Persona Ride, the whole board becomes stronger and we do like that very much so. So we want to play another 3 copies. Then I play 2 copies of the Salvager that I mentioned. So this is the Usarura. So you can, I think the start deck comes with 3 of these, and you can play 3 or you can play 4. The effect is, when you place on a rearguard circle, you counterblast 1 and you choose an equipment card in your drop and add it back to your hand. So this is basically there to salvage your swords after you've ditched them, or if you're forced to like PG and your only card in hand to discard for the PG was a sword, and then you draw into this, you can like salvage the sword and equip it. But generally speaking, like when you're double equipped and you're drawing well into the swords, this won't be as necessary, but there are going to be times when you're just not finding that second sword, and you need to basically use this card to salvage it. If you're feeling a little unstable about like, resalvaging the swords or like finding your other copies, you can actually bump this to 4 if you want, and I'll tell you what you can take out in order to make space for more copies of this. I just want to play more cards that have shield because I feel like this deck is almost like Orphist at the time being, where you just have like, a bunch of orders that do stuff, but then you want to be able to like just tank with your whole hand otherwise. For the grade 2s, we don't play that many. We play 3 more copies of the Haribadora. So this time is for the rearguard circle effect, which says when this unit attacks on rearguard circle, if your Vanguard is equipped for that battle against +5 25k power. So it's a 15k attacker with any grade 1 that's a 23k line, thus asking for 15k shield every single time. And so on Persona Ride, that's 33, so it asks for quite a lot of shield. And basically we just want to make nice columns of like, 23, 25 very easily. And this is a big component in doing that, together with the grade 3 that salvages. And then this is basically the two cards that you can cut if you want to make space for more of the grade 3, which is of course 2 copies of the Oshikuni. So Oshikuni actually is pretty good in Bavsargra as well for the time being until set 4, because on rear circle when he attacks, if your opponent has 2 or less rears, he gets plus 5k power until end of that battle. So he's another 15k attacker, and you usually do have his condition if you are on turn 4, because after burning your opponent's front row, most decks don't really play Vanguard boosters, or they like leave something open in the back row, so usually they don't have anything else, so you usually get the 15k off of him. But he's not very stable because some decks might actually just like spam the back row, like Magnolia for example, where you don't actually have anything, you don't have a way to kill anything else in the back row, so then he becomes just a 10k base. So you can choose to cut him for more of the salvager, as I mentioned before, but I also like the shield value that the grade 2 provides, and therefore I do play him as a 2 of. Speaking of shield value, of course we play 4 of the Dragon Empire Perfect Guards. So these ones they've been printed in many ways, so they are rares and foils and SPs in the first booster set, but they're also promos at the start of 2021, like a frameless promo that was very easy to get. In my locals at least, they are super oversupplied and everybody basically has 2 to 3 playsets, so you should be able to ask around if you haven't found these in your local card shop, and there should be someone that has spares, because these are like the frameless ones are really abundant. Then for our next grade 1, this one I really do like in Bavsargra at the moment, which is the Fushimachi Madoka. So we play 4 copies of him. So we want to really play a lot of different grade 1s in this deck, because Bavsargra can revive them from the drop, and also the recommended playstyle with this deck, I think, is to really go, like, if you go second, just rush from turn 1, rush on turn 2, like, push your opponent, so that way you can, like, start pressuring them with Bavsargra immediately, and they'll usually try to keep themselves around 4 anyway, right, just by guarding, so you still have the pressure with the sword. But by rushing early, a lot of decks in the current meta are turn 4 reliant. I'm thinking of things like Bruce and Lauren Roll, so you can actually kind of win before they even set up, which is really nice. And Fushimachi Madoka is a really good grade 1. He says, Rearguard Circle and Guardian Circle, if your opponent's drop has 4 more cards, he gets plus 2000 power and plus 5k shield. So he's already a 10k attacker slash 10k boost slash 10k shield. And if your opponent's drop zone has 8 or more cards, he gets another 5k shield. So he's a 15k shield. So it's really nice because we make up for having less shield value in the deck by running orders, by running this card. And so we have 15k shield slash 10k shields in the long run that are very useful. So this card is excellent in my opinion, and definitely should be run as a 4 for the time being. Then our next one is another good grade 1 that we want to be running in order to make this deck even more threatening on the rearguard circles, which is Tenchasted. So Tenchasted is a double rare from D-BT01, and he says when the attack this unit boosted hits, you can count almost 1 and retire it to choose your Vanguard and search your deck for up to 1 card with the same card name as that card, reveal it and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. So what this does is you can boost and hit this not just to the Vanguard but also to the rears, which is really nice because that way you can like keep your opponent at 4 and like kind of control their board. But it basically searches Persona Ride, which is really good because that's a huge power increment to your front row and you always want to have that. Now some people play the build of Bavsargra right now with Arcs and Trickstar, and I'm personally not a big fan of that because yes, you can keep reviving the Trickstar with Bavsargra's effect and then keep going into Arcs, but that means that in your early mulligan, you're not only mulliganing for the sword, you also need to mulligan for Trickstar, you also need to mulligan for Arcs, and instead I like to just focus on mulliganing for the sword while just drawing naturally into grade 1s that help me rush and have an aggressive early game. So this is kind of why people call this deck good stuff Bavsargra, right? Because cards like Tenchasted and Fushimachi Madoka are just like good stuff Dragon Empire. And adding to this rush, our final grade 1 is actually the Ride Line grade 1. So this is the Namokaru. So Namokaru says on rearguard circle, when it attacks for that battle, it gets plus 2k. So it's a 10k attacker, which means that even when your opponent's on grade 2, you can still push with him for 10k and make nice little columns. And you can revive him with Bavsargra to be a 10k attacker, boost him with, for like Tenchasted for example, to make 18k columns and hit for magic numbers, making 28 on Persona Ride. So I think it's actually quite good for the time being as a, you know, just like an early good card for rushing as well as to be revived by Bavsargra. As for triggers, we play one of the Dragon Empire Over trigger. If you don't have access to this or it's too expensive for you, because I know that these have been going up in price lately, you can play the one that you find in the start deck, the Olbaria. It is completely fine because Olbaria will still be very strong because, for example, if let's say you attack with Bavsargra and your opponent perfect guards it because you have the crit on it, and then you check the Crit Elemental Olbaria Over trigger, you can use a sword to push your opponent to 5 and then put the 200 millions on your rearguard columns, and then your opponent needs to PG both of them or they will die. Whereas with the Dragon Empire one, you restand your Vanguard so you get that pressure once again and you can still dig for more drive checks. So they're actually both really good overtriggers for this deck, but I prefer the Dragon Empire one because of, you know, if you do check it, that's an extra 2 drive checks as well, so it is quite good, and the crit pressure from Bavsargra also stays, which is very nice. But again, you can definitely play both of them. There's no wrong in playing either the Dragon Empire one or the Odebaria. Then for the remaining triggers, we play 4 of the effect criticals. This is the Burning Flail Dragon. So this card is really nice because we do require a bit of soul for Bavsargra, so this says at the end of the bell that it boosts, you can put into the soul to give a unit plus 2k. So this also helps to make some of your like columns a little bit less awkward and just make like nicer numbers. Because if you have 2 of him, that's a +4, so you can make like a 20k column of like 2 Fushima Madokas, for example, into 24, depending on what your attack pattern was, and also just provides you soul, which is very nice, so it's a good critical trigger to run regardless. Then we run 4 of the regular critical trigger that you find in the start deck, which is the Conduct Spark Dragon. Extra critical is always good because, you know, you have a crit on Bavsargra, so you want to put the crits on the rearguard circles to really threaten that lethal. But if not, you know, we always have nice big boards and nice big numbers, so front triggers will always help. You really don't need draws in this deck, in my opinion, because you already plus a lot from the ride line, and you save a lot of cards by using the Swayambu, the shield. And so with that, I think you want to just go for the bigger shield power fronts, in my opinion. I think that is definitely better because these fronts, of course, say that when your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, it gets plus 5k shield. So it's basically 20k shield, which is very much appreciated against those annoying 28k attacks. And finally, it goes without saying, we play 4 heal triggers. So I play the one from the Nirvana start deck, but of course, you can also play the ones from the Bavsargra start deck. All heal triggers are the same. So of course, heals are good and we do want to play them. I now want to quickly talk a little bit about the ride deck discards. So for either your first ride or your second ride, it's actually quite fine to discard one of the equipments because the equipments are salvaged by the grade 2 when you ride it. Don't discard 2 because you can only salvage 1, but you can either, you know, if you open too many, or like, you know, you open the sword, you can discard it and then use the grade 1 to search for the shield, and then when you ride the grade 2, you will just take the sword back to your hand. So for either your grade 1 ride or your grade 2 ride, it's fine to discard one of the equipments depending on which one you drew into, if you did draw into any. And otherwise, it's quite fine to just discard your grade 1 such as Namokaru and Tenchested, because Bavsargra will revive them. I personally wouldn't be discarding Fushima Madoka because it's a nice big shield power, you know, in your hand that you can guard with. But these two are basically very nice cards to discard that like are good attackers of only 5k shield, or good boosters in the case of Tenchested that Bavsargra can revive. Otherwise, you can also discard triggers if you have too many in hand and you don't want to discard any of your other pieces, but those are generally the recommended cards to discard. Alright, now I'd like to give you a quick example of the basic movements of this deck and the kind of mulligan thought process and what you should be kind of redrawing for. So this is our opening hand. Of course, there's quite a few cards we don't really want. But generally speaking, like the grade 1s are cool for early rush, but we don't see a sword, we don't see any kind of weapon. So we want to just put these 5 cards back. Alternatively, if you open a Bavsargra, you can also keep it for the Persona ride. Ooh, this is a very nice opening. So we actually open a sword and a shield, which means this will make our discards at the start as well as our searches a little bit easier. And having the backup sword is also very nice because that just means that you'll be able to immediately discard one of them and, you know, be able to use one on turn 4 and then replace it very quickly as well, which is quite nice. All right, so we give our deck a quick shuffle after the mulligan, and now let's get into it. So we draw 1 card at the start of our turn, and now, as I mentioned earlier, we can basically just discard one of our orders. So let's discard the Swayambu in order to ride into the Namokar. Namokar's ability will proc, we'll Soul Blast 1 in order to search our deck for one of the weapons. So we already have both, but we have more copies of PTB in the deck, and it's always a valuable card, so you should always use the search effect, even if you think that you won't have enough soul in the future, because you do soul charge a lot from Bavsargra's effect when you do equip cards, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right, so the order gets added to our hand, and if we went first, then we just pass here. Our opponent probably attacks, deals us 1 damage, we take a critical, no problem there, and then we draw a card for turn. We get a grade 2, which could allow us for some early rushing, but I think it's actually quite fine to not do that. Instead, we're going to choose to discard a critical trigger here for the right deck, and then ride into our Haribadara. Haribadara's effect will activate, and we're going to salvage one of the shields, the Swayambu, into our hand. So it's going to go here. So now we have a pretty nice and healthy hand, and here you can choose if you want to start rushing or not, but as we don't have any grade 1s, I'll personally hold off. This will be better used next turn when we can actually make use of, you know, the other things that we have going for us in the grade 1s. So just attack for 10k, see what we check, and overtrigger. So this, of course, will go off, and we'll be able to draw a card from removing the overtrigger, and then basically just restand the Vanguard attack again with the 100 million. Usually the opponent will take that, so we basically got 1 extra card out of that, or 2, I guess. Technically 1. but that is definitely quite nice. And then we're going to probably take a couple damage from our opponent here as well, a grade 1 and a grade 2, so nothing too major. And then let's say our opponent just attacking with a big attack, so we're going to guard that to make sure we don't go into too much damage. And then this is basically the first grade 3 turn, what it's going to look like. We draw into his Bavsargra, which is very nice. So now we can actually choose to discard one of these weapons. So let's discard the Swayambu, sorry, the Prithvi, and we're going to ride the Bavsargra from the right deck. So now we rode Bavsargra, and we want to first resolve the shield. We always want to equip the shield first because the plus 10k defensively is much better. As good as a sword is, you're going to lose it the next turn, and there's no way to have double equip otherwise, so we want to equip this first. The equipment cost is counterblast 1, so you want to do that first, and then when you equip, Bavsargra's effect will allow you to soul charge 1. We're going to soul charge a Ushkini, and we're going to be able to choose a grade 1 or lower from our drop zone and revive it. So here at some point, it would have been good if we would have drawn into some kind of grade 1 that could have let us like discard a grade 1 for the right deck to revive. But sadly we didn't, so we can choose the starter actually, the Ahimsa, to revive here. It's not the best target, but we can definitely make do with it. So we'll put it over here to the right, or let's put it where there's less glare, to the left. Apologies that my lights are a bit glary. And so now we have the one equipment, but we can still do more with this. So here we want to call down the grade 3. This will let us counterblast 1 and be able to recover the sword back into our hand, so we can use it to discard for a perfect guard or something like that. And then we just call the grade 2 here, the Haribadara, because this will now get plus 5k from us being equipped, and our opponent is still on grade 2 if we went first. So this means that these attacks are attacking for nice numbers. You can alternatively also have put this here instead, so this way you're making a 21k line. So going first is quite good, but going second it won't be as effective. We're going to attack with Vanguard first here. It's only 13 because of course the plus 10k here is only during the opponent's turn. And then we're going to drive check. We get a Fushima Jimadoka as well as the front triggers. That's quite good. We get to power up our entire front row, and then here we're basically going to get the bonus swings of the 23, as well as here this will be 25 boosted by 6, so that is going to be 31. All right, so with that we basically finish up our turn here, and then basically our opponent's turn we take a damage, lose a Bavsargra there, and then on one of the attacks you can actually activate the Swayambu to get plus 10k. And let's say here we're going to intercept to make a 15k shield together with the shield, with the Swayambu, so that is also very nice. And then we can, let's say we just guard with our front trigger, and then guard with the Fushima Jimadoka for 15 if our opponent already has 8 cards in the drop zone. Then we can revive this with Bavsargra's effect next turn from the drop, which is always very good. All right, then it comes back to our turn, so we're going to stand and draw. We draw into an up with Persona Ride. We can Persona Ride now into Bavsargra, so our whole front row will get plus 10k, and we draw an extra card. And so now we can choose to equip with the Prithvi. So in order to equip it, we have to pay Soul Blast 1, so we can Soul Blast any card. I recommend Soul Blasting the grade 1, so you can revive it with Bavsargra's effect. So pay the Soul Blast cost, and now of course Bavsargra will Soul Charge 1 from her own effect because we equipped, and we can revive a grade 1 now. So here I will choose to revive the Fushima Jimadoka because this will make a 23k column with a grade 3, which is very much appreciated. And basically now we can just make this into a anything column basically with a 6k and get swinging. And of course here, now that we have 2 cards equipped on the Vanguard circle, with the 2 equipment cards, we can choose to use Bavsargra's effect to Soul Blast 2. So we're going to pay the 2 Soul Blast and retire opponent's front row, and then she gets an extra critical. So this is now coming in with 23-33 because of the effect of the sword, as we are now equipped with it and also have the Persona Ride. So 33, we get a heal trigger, which is very nice. We're on 4, let's assume our opponent's also at 4, so we do get to heal. We can give the power to the rearguard column here, and then get another heal trigger. This one, let's say, doesn't pop, but we can give the power to one of our rearguards again. And then at the end of the battle, if our opponent's still at 4 or less damage, we can use the sword here to counterblast 2, and choose the sword and throw it at our opponent, and it's going to break and go to the drop zone, but we managed to deal a damage. And then we basically try to push for the last lethal damage with our rear guards, and if that doesn't actually win us the game, then we just use the Swayambu next turn as well to protect ourselves, guard with our hand, Persona Ride again, and equip the sword again to go for victory. So, what did you think? This was the Bavsargra set 3 deck profile. Like I said before, I do think that good stuff Bavsargra is a little bit better than trying to force Arcs and Trickstar into the deck. While the draw power is nice and recurring Trickstars and, overdressing Arcs into it is pretty good, I think overall the Dragon Empire card pool is quite good to let you play a more good stuff oriented deck like this. If you're a new player, especially if you're starting out with the Minaemire Bavsargra start deck, please feel free to ask any questions in the comments below, and I'll also be working on a deck profile and some gameplay of the deck after the D-BT04 set 4 support, because the deck gets very, very strong and gets some amazing tools in that set to make this deck even stronger. I'm personally looking to main this deck as well, together with some of the other decks that I'm already passionately playing in Overdress, because I really love the art style. I think Bavsargra is absolutely beautiful, and some of you remember my Overdress wish list from the beginning of 2021, and one of the things I requested personally was was for an equipment-based deck, and my wish was granted, and so I have to uphold it and keep playing this deck. Other than that, guys, if you liked the video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel as well, as we're getting closer and closer to 50,000 subscribers. Also, if you'd like to order your own Bavsargra start deck in English, you can find it at parkage.com. You can use my discount code DifferentFight for a 5% discount at checkout. Other than that, that's gonna be it for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.